بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على النبي الكريم وبعد. Honorable brothers and elders and sisters, as we all know that our religion, Islam, is the religion of ibadat and muamalat, religion of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also dealings and transactions as well. You know, what to do, how to buy and sell, and if you were to borrow money from someone, how to give it back, and what to do. You'll find details in the Quran and Sunnah. In fact, the longest ayah in the Quran is about debt. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O who you believe, إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ. If you do a transaction of debt, if you borrow money from someone for a specific time, إِلَى أَجَلٍ مُسَمًّى فَاكْتُبُوا, write it down. The longest verse in the Quran. This is the longest verse in the whole of the Quran, the Ayatul Dain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. So debt, borrowing money, how to borrow, when to give it back, how to give it back, when to write it down, all of that, the guidelines we find. Why? Because this is very important in our Sharia. Very important in our Sharia, that muamala, dealings are very important. So our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his salah, is to pray this dua. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ma'thami wal-maghram. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from committing sins and getting into higher debts, heavy debts. Someone heard this. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they know the Prophet of Allah, he doesn't commit sins, you know, and but that's okay. But the second part, the Prophet of Allah saying, "Oh Allah, save me from getting into debts." So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why do you make this dua? Notice the Sahabi didn't ask about the sin part, because they know the Prophet of Allah is teaching us. The second part, why do you say, "Oh Allah, save me from debts"? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do you know, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ إِذَا غَرِمَ حَدَّثَ فَكَذَبَ وَعَدَ فَأَخْلَفَ. Because the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this is very important. He said, do you know why? Because you see a very good person, mashallah, he's very good, he prays and he does everything, but suddenly when he gets into debt, his whole character changes. He's a different person now. This is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, this is what's going to happen. I don't want this to happen to you, because I know this is what's going to happen. When you go into debt, then he will, whenever he speaks, he will lie. And then he will make promises and he will break the promises. So the whole character will change. So I don't want my ummah to get into debts and the whole character changes. And people will be talking about you now. Because, oh, so-and-so, he owes me money and he goes on a holiday. He owes me money, he's having fun. He owes me money, he's driving a car. People will be talking, and this is not something what the Prophet of Allah wanted. He said, don't go into debt. If you have to, then make sure that you have the means to pay back. That's what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to make this dua. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika minal ma'thami wal maghrami. The Prophet of Allah is teaching us to make this dua. Oh Allah, save us from committing sins and getting into debt. You know, once the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting in a masjid after the salah, and he was facing the crowd. You know, that's why you see the Imam, after he finished his salah, he faced the crowd. The Prophet of Allah was facing everybody. Suddenly the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he looked towards the heaven. Sahaba used to always look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his movements. He looked towards the heaven and he put his hand onto his forehead like this. I said, Subhanallah. I said, Ya Allah, such a very difficult command has been revealed from the heaven. Sahaba, they said, we were so scared, we never asked him, what is that? We just stayed quiet. The next day, after the Salatul Fajr, we asked him, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what was the severe, difficult command and task and issue was given from the heaven to you? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Walladhi nafsi biyadihi." I swear by the one in whose hand is my life. A person, if he were to go out in the path of Allah, then he becomes shaheed. Then he was given another life and he becomes shaheed again. You know, ثُمَّ أُحْيَا فَقُتِلَ. And then he was given a life again, and then he was killed in the path of Allah. He will still not enter Jannah if he has any debt until his debt is paid off. This is what the Prophet of Allah said. Someone, the most highest position in the sight of Allah is the position and rank of a martyr. A martyr goes straight to Jannah, not only if he has debt. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. That's why Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala used to say, guys, be careful. I know you like to borrow money. Iyyakum ad-dayn. Be very careful from borrowing money and going into debt. He says, فَإِنَّ أَوَّلَهُ هَمٌّ وَآخِرَهُ حَرْبٌ. It starts with a worry, ends with a war. Umar al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You be every single day and not be worrying, how do I pay this back? Why? Your worries and concern should be going into Jannah and Akhirah. So if you have debt, you need to find a way to pay back. Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anhu, with this I will end inshallah. Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was going into an expedition. I read this hadith in Riyadh al-Salihin. He was going into a war, going into an expedition, sorry. He called his family members, his children. And this is something that I advise to all of us. Who is Zubair, first of all? One of the Ashara Mubasharin bil Jannah. One of the 10 was given the glad tidings to enter Jannah by Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Zubair radiallahu ta'ala, he called all his children. He said, my children, especially his eldest one, Abdullah. He said, Abdullah bin Zubair, what is it? He said, Abdullah, I am going into expedition tomorrow. I don't think I will return. I'm going into, I'm going into khuruj fi sabilillah. I'm going to jihad fi sabilillah, into an expedition. I don't think I will return. I think I will be killed unjustly. And I don't have worry. Alhamdulillah, I was one of the very first to embrace Islam. I was always with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah, I've never committed any of the crime that will bring the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I have one fear, my son. I have one fear. He said, what is it, father? He said, my debt. Like that. And he said, Abdullah said that he was talking so much about their debt. I said, father, don't worry. I will take care of it. He said, look, I have a lot of lands. And he was a very rich person. From this you could understand. He had 11 houses in Medina. He had 2 houses in Basra, 2 in Kufa, 2 in Egypt. He's a man of many lands and properties. He said, sell them and make sure that you pay off my debt. He said, father, don't worry, I will do that. He said, look, if you ever get in trouble and you cannot pay off my debt, then seek help from my master. So Abdullah said, I don't understand what he said. I said, Man mawlaka ya abi. My father, who is your mawla? Who is your master? He said, Allah. Allah is our master. Because whenever I was in debt, I said, oh Allah, oh Lord of Zubayr, help Zubair to remove his debt. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped me. So from this we learn that if anyone is in debt, always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah will create ways for you, inshallah ta'ala. And then alhamdulillah, Zubair, all his debt was alhamdulillah paid, and so much extra money was left, and all the children, mashallah, they distributed among themselves. But the most important thing here, someone was given the glad tidings of Jannah, and is going in the path of Allah, and he has no worries of dying. He has no worries of dying in the path of Allah. The only worry he has is that what's going to happen to my debt after I pass away. These are the best people who walked on this earth. And we today are so relaxed. When it comes to borrowing money, we borrow it. When it comes to pay back, we don't even have any worries, any concern. We don't even communicate with the person. This is not Islamic manners. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to have worries and concern about everything that we do, including when it comes to borrowing money and paying back. Ameen.